Hi class, welcome to FIP 136 Inspections and Codes. My name is Dr. Rusty Nolan Graham, and I will be your instructor for this class. Normally I teach this class in person, so getting to teach it online is kind of a unique adventure for all of us. A lot of times what I like to do is I like to put the code book in front of you and have you actually dig into the codes, and we start to have an honest discussion on why we do things the way we do. So that discussion now will be handled through discussion board. I'm not going to be quizzing you a lot on the different aspects of the code. I'm probably going to hit a section a week, and I'll also ask you 5 to 6 questions and have you answer. The biggest part's going to be our discussion board. Okay. Last week, I posed to you the question of what is the role of the fire inspector? And I had you watch a video of an inspector who did not do their job. Well, I want to go ahead and start out by saying I did include a short paper that had 5 things that the city of Thomasville considers most important for their fire inspectors. But I want to kind of come back and say, okay, here's what I think is the most important. And very few times I get to say, hey, this is what I think, and then basically have nobody question it. So I'm kind of liking the online thing for a second. Okay, the most important thing the fire inspector does is physically goes out and performs inspections. We physically go out and we look to make sure that all the hazards that we can eliminate are eliminated. Okay, so to be successful as a fire inspector, you have to be knowledgeable of the code and also be willing to stay in the fire code because it changes. About every 3 years, we get a new edition of the fire code. Okay, so we're constantly doing Con Ed. We get 6 hours of continuing education every year on different topics. Okay, I actually teach for some of the different agencies their Con Ed topic for the year. So you're going out and conducting inspections. That's critical. Enforcing the codes. Along with doing the inspections, we have to enforce the codes. If somebody's leaving a door locked, we have to threaten them with a ticket. A lot of times what I would do is, again, I wrote zero tickets during my time as a fire marshal. What I did is I enforced the codes by educating the people. We physically would go out and we would explain why the door needs to be unlocked. For example, if I'm out there and I'm at a manufacturing facility and that door is locked, I don't leave until that door is unlocked and can't be relocked. You're going to say, why? Well, okay, let's say that I issue them a warning for a locked door. 30 minutes later, there's a fire inside that structure and somebody can't get out that door. I'm now responsible for allowing that life safety hazard to be there. Okay? Life safety hazards are what gets people in trouble, gets people killed. So it's a cover your butt moment. Okay? Enforcing other codes. Think about it. Am I going to stay until they put a light bulb or a new battery in an emergency exit sign? No. Am I going to come back in 30 days and check it? Of course. What about if it doesn't have a battery? What if it's just one of those signs that lights up because it's all day long hit by the sunlight and at night it glows? It's perfectly acceptable. There are many different ways to meet the requirements of the code. Okay? Our job is to enforce it correctly. Things that we're looking for a lot of times, holes in walls, anything that could allow fire to travel is something we're going to address during our inspections and our enforcement functions. Okay? Now, those are 2 parts that we're used to. A lot of what we do is actually education. We're physically out in the community explaining why the codes exist and how we can assist them. Hey, like I always tell people, you call me and you ask me to come in and look at a building and give you an honest opinion. I'm not coming then as an enforcement agent. At that moment, I'm coming as an educator. I will help you every step of the way. We may find other ways to enforce the code together. I had a church a few years ago that had a massive drum setup, and they had inside that drum area, they had all this padding. Well, that padding was actually a hydrocarbon that was incredibly flammable. In fact, if you went back and looked at the nightclub fire, that's actually the same padding that they had up for the sound resistance. I looked at them, I said, you can't have it without any fire protection on it. So we started talking about our options. We ended up going out and finding a fire spray retardant they could put on it. I told them still this isn't a perfect solution, but it's a solution that at least buys us time to get everybody out. Over the next 2 years, they decided it wasn't worth their effort and they went to an electronic set of drums. But that again was a useful moment for them. Similar situation we had for a bakery. A bakery had a single enclosed area where both they were baking and they were doing the public stuff. They didn't want people to see their kitchen, so they put up a cloth. Okay, that just like you have in your bathroom, one of those little awnings that are just cloth. The problem was in that situation, that material had to be flame retardant. Again, we were able to go out and figure it out and have them spray it. It didn't cost them as much, and there was never a fine. Why was there no fine? Because it was an educational moment. Same situation, the fire limits in the city of Belmont. We had at that time it was called amberjacks. And physically they had built an illegal wooden deck in the middle of the town's fire limits. Now, to explain what fire limits is basically an area inside your town that says no wooden structures can be built. It's for the safety of the town itself. Remember, back in the old days, if the town burnt down, the town was not going to be rebuilt. So once it was built, we had to go in. At that point, we'd have the awning sprayed, the deck itself sprayed, under the deck sprayed, and we had to go back every 6 months and make sure that it was not falling off of it. That's how we worked with it. The other way would have been having them to destroy the deck. Okay? Our job is to protect people. And as long as we're doing that and working as hard as we can, we're going to do well. Okay? We may also be asked to interpret a code. The longer you do this, the more often you're going to have people calling you and asking questions about codes. Hey, what does this code mean? And as the fire inspector, if you know the answer, you can give them the answer. What I always say is, let's look at the code book together. Let's read it. Let's see if we can come up with a solid interpretation. If we can't come up with a solid interpretation, we can call OSFM, and their actual building specialist or code specialist themselves will give us an interpretation. And once they give us that interpretation, it'll physically be on their website for another inspector to find. So a lot of times in this process, we'll go ahead, once we look at it, then we'll go to OSFM's website, physically pull down the interpretations and see if we can find it. Another way to find the interpretation, and again, as the code enforcement officer being asked this question, is to go out to the International Code Council's version of the International Fire Code. There's actually an explanatory book that's about this thick that actually goes into diagrams of how things are supposed to be measured. Understand this is for an interpretation. That particular book has not been approved by the General Assembly, therefore we cannot enforce it. I had a young fire inspector one time while I was out sick, physically going out and using the actual real International Fire Code and was trying to enforce it. He said, well, both books were read and both books had the same year. Here's what you need to know. When somebody asks about the fire code, as they say, the International Fire Code, we are always one cycle behind them because it takes that long for our General Assembly to vote and to make changes that they want just for North Carolina. When we purchase their code, we modify it. And just because they come out with a new set of codes, until the law says we have to enforce this set of codes, we can't do that. Okay? So really quickly, the importance of fire inspections. Why do we do them? It keeps our community safe. During my time as the head for Belmont, for example, the entire time that I was the lead code enforcement guy, back then we called them engineer inspectors, or I was one that was over that program. We had one commercial fire in about 4 years. God struck the building with a lightning strike. We'd gone out and we had figured out every other type of way to put it out. And that's why it may sound sad for firefighters. Think about it. A fire prevented guarantees a family never has to be sad. Also, we're protecting those lives and property. Okay? If our job truly is to protect lives and property, inspections and code enforcement is the best way to do it. So let's talk about some of the things that you're going to have to learn in this course. We're going to actually dig down into a little bit deeper. We're going to talk a little bit about fire dynamics. You need to be able to explain it to the general public exactly what a flow path is, exactly the issues that we're going to face, why the holes need to be caulked up, why they need to be fire rated, why we're using rock wool, things like that. If you don't know those terms yet, we're going to discuss them a little bit later in this course in more detail. Okay, we're going to talk about building instruction. Think about it. When you're doing a fire inspection, does it matter the type of building that you're doing the inspection on? Yes. Type 1 buildings are a whole lot easier to work with. Okay. We're also going to be able to teach you a little bit about how to communicate. I had a fire inspector one time. Somebody came up to ask him a question about the code, and he very kindly said, "Go buy your own damn book." I loved getting that phone call as his supervisor. That was a lot of fun. And yes, you're going to get that call from time to time. Okay. Now, building your skills up. Okay. Fire inspections is all about soft skills, understanding how to communicate our message of fire prevention safely. As long as we actually can get out there and get ahead of the problem and explain it, more people are happier to deal with us. Okay. They usually see us as a good guy compared to the police officer. Okay. Now, let's see. How do we get, okay, we briefly touched on this. The codes, how do we get the codes that we're actually going to enforce? Okay. First of all, there's what we call the North Carolina Administrative Code. That's the little tiny book that I linked to you. That book actually gives us the authority as code enforcement officers to get into the big book. Okay. Until that book is written, or is passed, we can't get into it. We actually had a situation a few years ago where the state assembly did not get that book finished in time, and they had told us to go ahead and go to the next book. We technically can't do that, and we did not. They understood that they had wrote the technical codes, and that when they talk about technical codes, that's your building, your plumbing, your electrical, and your fire. Okay. Administrative code is exactly what it says. It's the book that tells us our authority. It gives us the right to entry. It gives us the right to, basically, if somebody tells you you can't come in, that's where you go get your administrative search warrant. And also, once you do that, there's ways to have to deal with an administrative search warrant, and we'll discuss it very briefly later on. But physically, you're going to go in front of a magistrate, show them your ID, tell them that you are the fire inspector for this jurisdiction. You're going to show them your inspection plan where that building falls into it, and you're going to tell them you were denied entry. At that moment, they will issue you an administrative search warrant for a 24-hour period. Once you get an administrative search warrant, you're taking the cops with you. Okay? Because it's, and also record from the moment you open, the moment you go in to the moment you're done, because it's going to be a confrontational inspection. I've had only one time where I had to go prepared to get an administrative search warrant. And once they found out what it took to get an administrative search warrant and how different the inspection was going to be, they chose to call me back and ask me to do that, to actually come in and do that. So again, talking about this is the code book itself. Generally gives us all the authority we have. Here's where it gets more fun, guys. We're not just in this code book. A lot of times we're going to be in NFPA different standards. You're going to be in like 1126. You're going to be in NFPA 704. You're going to be in all these different standards because it's going to reference it and tell us to go there and enforce that code. We cannot look at NFPA standards until we are told by this code to enforce that standard. Okay? Other things you may have. You may have things that your council has actually asked you to be part of. Those are acceptable too. But generally speaking, all of our laws come out of North Carolina General Statute. You may see two different sets of numbers. General Statute 160, I believe, is for counties, and General Statute 164 is actually for the municipalities. Okay? Municipalities have the right to pull in their own fire inspector. They can do their own everything if they ask for it. Okay? It becomes more fun. You may actually be dealing with a lot more other pieces also. But that's generally where your laws are going to come from. Okay? Now, at this point, you've had a lot of information. My goal today really was to say hello, kind of tell you where we get our authority from, go ahead and cover a few pieces of this. I'm going to have some more reading for you and a little bit of a reading assignment. This time we're going to have an interactive discussion board where I'm going to ask you to go in and look at a question and start answering questions back and forth. And I'm also going to put a small mini test in there for you. Nothing complex. It's going to be easy this week. Next week, we're going to do a deeper dive where I have a few more days to prepare. If you have any questions, any problems, anything you need me for, please contact me. My email is rgraham911@cvcc.edu. Thank you and goodbye.